everyone. Welcome to the Darshan Talks podcast. I am your host, Darshan Kulkarni. It's my mission to help patients trust the products they depend on. As you know, I'm an attorney, I'm a pharmacist, and I advise companies with FDA-regulated products. So if you think about drugs, you wonder about medical devices, you worry about cannabis, or obsess over pharmacy, this is the podcast for you. Now, I do these podcasts because they're a lot of fun, and I get to talk to really interesting people like my guest for today. So it's nice to know when someone's listening. If you like what you hear, please leave a comment, please subscribe. You can find me on at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or just go to our website at darshantalks.com. Our guest today, our podcast today, is going to be about leadership development. It's about speaking, and it's about being heard, and it's about sort of making conscious decisions. And the guest we have today is really, really perfect because, as I've been informed and educated on, he is the international man of mystery. There were many, but I believe it's sort of like the Highlander, which is there can be only one. So he is the international man of mystery at this point. He is a international speaker, raconteur. I tried to ask what that means, but I don't actually know what that means. But he is a raconteur, a humorist, and a huge lover of research and data. The last part should be kind of interesting to a lot of the people listening in, because I like to believe that in life sciences, if you aren't doing anything with research and data, you kind of have a problem on your hands. But our guest for today, David McQueen. David, how are you? Thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much, Darshan. I am good. I'm in a good space today. Good energy. I'm pleased to be here.
Good energy. I already saw what you claim is malt in your hands, but but we know different.
It's okay. You know, we're good. Whether it's malt or it's imbued with a little bit of alcohol, we'll still get the same results. It doesn't really matter. So it's all good.
Very good. So David, let's talk a little bit about yourself. Now, obviously, you described yourself as a raconteur, yes, but I would argue you're a little bit of a provocateur as well when you describe yourself with International Man of Mystery. Why do you start with that?
So just because I know I don't want to have to make you go fighting and scrambling over to Google to find out what raconteur means. Basically, a raconteur is somebody who tells anecdotes or stories, but in a skillful and amusing way. So when you think of comedians who will take you on a journey with their story, what they're doing when they're taking you all through these loops before they drop the final bomb, that's raconteur. That's being a raconteur. But I would also say I'm a provocateur by all means, and I love to be able to get people to slightly think outside the box and be challenged around some things, to stretch their thinking without being offended by a different point of view. To be fair, I don't always succeed in that, but I love doing it regardless. And this whole concept of the international man of mystery is that I never feel tied to one country. I've never understood the whole concept of patriotism or nationalism. I see myself as a global citizen. Yes, my passport is British, but I believe wherever I go in the world, I'm connecting with humans and what have you. And the mystery part, well, if I told you, it wouldn't be mystery, would it?
I believe the line you're supposed to use is, I could tell you, but I have to kill you.
Well, you see, but again, as I said before, I do not want to incriminate myself, so I'm not going to go down there.
I've always wondered, like, does someone say that and then the person dies and you're like...
I think that's what actually happens, yeah.
But okay, let's start with the piece that goes along with that, which is you described yourself as a comedian. And one of the interesting things that I keep... Is it, first of all, have you ever been a professional comedian or sort of even
I did stand up, and so I use parts of stand up. I did it twice for charity, and I use parts of it. I trained and learned on it, but I use a lot of it in my delivery, especially when I know that a lot of my work deals with stuff that can be quite sensitive. So what I want to do is be able to at least release a little bit of tension so people don't take themselves too seriously, or me. And yeah, that bit of the raconteur comic part of it is just saying, look, just don't take yourself too seriously. Let's have a bit of fun with this. Even though it's serious, have a bit of fun with it as well.
So it's interesting you say that, because I actually took, I consider myself a semi-professional comedian because I took 4 classes in it. So okay. I'm definitely, it's me. It's It's Jerry Seinfeld and a couple others, but I'm not sure anyone else really. I mean, my 4 classes definitely put me in that league.
Yes.
So considering
create your own pantheon. No one's going to remove it from you. It's yours.
it's a very weird subset of people. But I guess my question for you is, especially at a time like this, where you are admittedly a provocateur, you are admittedly, as you described it, a pattern breaker. What is the role of humor in a world where so many people are so easily offended?
I think it's important because humor in many ways allows us to see our frailty. And there are times when you use humor where you will just see the weakness of the human spirit. And that ability to just laugh, even though you know it might make you uncomfortable, but you are able to release it, and all the serotonin and all the different, the heady mixture of drugs that we already have in our body starts flowing through our system. And I think it's important, but I also think it's important to understand audience and context. There are some bits of humor that may land in one that may not necessarily land in another. And I'm quite conscious of that because I'm quite an advocate around equality and equity and inclusion. So I'm very conscious of that. There are going to be some people that are going to be offended. I have a friend, a trans woman, and we have a running joke around the alphabet mafia, which is our kind of like long version of LGBT plus. We have that as a joke, but I
believe you missed the QIA.
Oh no, I stopped at plus. All right, I stopped, and that's the whole point. But being part of and being an advocate and being an ally, especially when I know how serious stuff is around people who have either been bullied or young people who have been homeless or what have you, having an individual who we can talk about the alphabet mafia as a joke or what have you is quite a great way for us to release some tension around what is a serious subject. However, I also know that if I took that humor somewhere else where I haven't had that connection and started to use that phrase as part of my strapline as a heterosexual man, it could land very wrongly. So it really is about understanding the audience, being able to use specific terms that will connect with that audience, but just saying, look, in a world where so much has happened, especially within the last 12 months, we need an outlet. We can't just jump on a plane anymore and just run away from it. So, while we're here, we need an outlet, and there are ways and means of being able to do that in a space that will make people laugh. And the truth is look, Darshan, there are going to be some people who are going to be offended if the wind blows. They'll be offended when the sun shines. You have to leave them in their state of offense. There are certain times where you're going to go and say something or speak to individuals and somebody's toes are going to get stepped on. And that's the way of the world. And I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with the fact that some people may get offended by some of the stuff I'm saying. I'm okay. As long as I know that I'm not intentionally going out to target you as an individual while I'm talking about a larger thing, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with that. So I definitely use it as part of my my communication rucksack, or backpack, as you would say.
Rucksack sounds so much more outdoorsy and adventurous, but but ignoring that part of it, I think you make an interesting comment when you talk about terms, loaded terms, having a role. You described the use of the term alphabet mafia, which in certain contexts totally makes sense, and in other contexts may land a little bit more poorly, and or at least ungracefully, for lack of a better term. I guess the question I have that comes out of it is, for you, maybe even for me, as people who are often coming in as third parties, as consultants, or as advisors, we have the luxury of going, okay, we made a mistake, we can move on, we'll improve the next time around. How does that work if you're advising a CEO or someone in the C-suite who is trying to also go, I need to get you guys to think differently, I need to push you, but I need to develop long-term relationships. Is there a role for humor and potentially stepping on the wrong toes in a world where you're seen not only as the leader, but in some ways a reference point? And I'm not I'll let you reference that first before you go to
Yeah. So before I really kind of like delved into doing the work that I do around leadership, a lot of the work that I did was specifically just focus on presentation skills. So speech writing, presentations, pitching, conference speeches, investor calls, all that kind of stuff, which was cool. But I realized for me, there was a deeper sense of communication that had to be done before that, which is why I ended up doing the leadership communication piece. And one of the things I used to say to a number of senior leaders when they were doing presentations is I'm not going to write any jokes for you because in my head, I know how funny they will be. And if you don't deliver it the same way that I expect you to, I'm going to be so disappointed. So let's just park that because it's not going to work. But then I'd also say to them that the thinking that humor is only related to a joke does injustice to the wideness of what actual humor actually is. Humor is about observations, it's about commentary, it's about story, it's about anecdote. And being able to have, for example, in an organization, an internal story, an internal thing that people that have an in joke, you can go to firms and sometimes they'll be laughing at stuff and you're looking down there thinking that isn't actually even remotely funny, but because it actually connects with something that they've known and an experience that they have, then that actually resonates. And so I always say to individuals, do that, but make sure you have an intent in mind. If you're going to have a story or an anecdote and be able to tell that, make sure it's part of intent. So you want people to come on that journey with you. And for me, part of humor is around vulnerability, especially if it's like self-deprecating and you are the source of that kind of humor. The story is about you. It's also about trust. So if you do go and tell a story about other people around you or what have you, do you have the trust to be able to share that? Is that something that you did with permission? And what does it do to be able to talk about being in that space where somebody's strong enough to be able to share that story and not kind of like end up in a corner wailing and drinking strange bottles of malt? What does it actually look like to be in that position of strength? And so it has to tie in for me with an overall or an overarching narrative that you have around your company's values or behaviors or the rituals that you have within that organization. And people have got to be able to understand how they can weave that thread together. Because the downside is if you go there and it flops and it goes really bad, as a senior leader, you can lose all those things I spoke about. You can make people not necessarily think or want to be vulnerable around you because they felt that you were being insensitive. You can lose trust if you haven't had that conversation. And I've seen it happen many times, the authority that you think you have, if you haven't been really careful about how you communicate, you lose that sense of authority as well. So in coaching individuals, and I still do a little bit of this, but I do it a lot more around storytelling. How can leaders craft stories and narratives around what it is that they're doing? It has to interlink. It shouldn't be something a standalone just because you think you want to be funny in a speech. It's got to be something that is part of your communication roadmap in the first place. And then how can we pull those things together to make sure it works?
So it's interesting you use the term roadmap.
Yeah.
Because for me, the word roadmap almost gets thrown around in corporate speak as this brilliant concept that the very select few know, and it's going to be this idea that transforms everything. What I heard you say in the conversation you just had was it's almost a internal vocabulary that enables not just the ones in the know to speak, but the entire team, the entire company potentially to move in the same direction. I guess, first of all, was that accurate, or did I put words in your mouth with that statement?
No, that's fine. That's fine. And by the way, I use roadmap instead of GPS because with a roadmap, you know where you're going.
Fair enough. I never know where I'm going with my GPS. It's always a surprise. But ignoring that part of it, no, I guess my question for you, and I've never seen this done, and maybe it's done, and I just haven't seen it. You'll see terms like corporate values, and you'll see terms like roadmap being used in large companies. Have you ever actually seen a cohesive, almost vocabulary for what is the culture of this company when you walk in? For example, is it informal? And what is the level of informality that is expected from people? Can I just call the CEO, or should I be holding off and going through my chains, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Have you, in your experiences, have you seen that, and what is the impact of that?
So I'm one where I tend not to make assumptions around what that culture looks like. So whenever I go into those spaces, I've realized that there are times where organizations can have, it's like a school inspection, if I can make it that way. When you have a school, when a school's get inspected, I don't know what they're like on your side of the pond in comparison to where we are. But when you have a school here, everybody's on their best behavior because they know they're going to be inspected. Teachers are teaching the curriculum. Everybody looks good. Everybody's well behaved. All the naughty kids are like down in the field somewhere to the right, and no one else can actually see where they are. And very often, you know, I've been where I've worked on projects around equity and inclusion, and I've gone to sites or spaces, and people have been on their best behavior. And I won't swear on your podcast, but I've just come on, guys, this is BS. This isn't real. This is how it's happening. When I ask you honest questions, and I said, and if you don't answer me honestly, then it will speak more to the fear that you have of speaking your truth in here. What I will do is I will start to ask the question, what does that look like? Are there hierarchies? Is it a flat organization? Do you work in silos? What's the vibrancy here? What does it actually look like? And like, for example, if I work in banks, you know, it's not I'll say it's a well-known secret. Banks are very siloed and very vertical and very hierarchical. You'll go and there'll be the private arm over here. You'll get the mortgages over here. You'll get the commercial side over here. And never the twain shall meet. They're all operating in these basically different zones. And in my mind, I'm like, if you all come together and actually have a conversation, the economies of scale in terms of time, energy, and money that you could actually save would be amazing. But then you have those conversations and you walk away from there going, they're just not going to do it. They're absolutely not going to do it. So for me, it's always a question of just asking, just finding out exactly where people are coming from. And I ask as much as I can. And then based on that information that I have, I feedback, this is what I heard, and this is what I'm gathering, and this is what I'm getting from you. And in some places, to be fair, the more formal ones will work because it's necessary for process, for compliance, for, you know, however, especially when you're talking about industries where health and safety and compliance are very paramount. You will see that seeping through the actual organization around food, around chemical products, around, you know, all that kind of stuff. You'll see that. Whereas on the other side, when you're talking about professional services and what have you, you'll probably see a much more informal character around advertising, around technology, or what have you. Because although there was there's still a need to get things right, they're not as fussed about looking the part or having these big steps of hierarchy before I can go and talk to that person over there because they're more senior than me. So it does depend on the actual organization, and then I just tend to ask loads of questions just to get a sense of what it is, and then make my moves from there.
Now it's interesting. You talk about the idea that you need to ask questions and you need to use that as a baseline. However, we also simultaneously talked a little bit about this program you're developing around equity and inclusion, and this is Pride Month in the U.S. I don't know if it's a global thing.
Yes, same here.
Okay, good. So that in the LGBTQ, or as you put it, the alphabet police culture, if you will, there is a sense of secrecy in that people are still discovering who they are. People are still going, what does this, do I want to come out? In those scenarios, how do you even identify where people are to be able to understand how to meet them where they are? Does that question make sense?
Yeah. So I think it's more about the system.
Okay.
Because whenever I think about that, a culture where we want equity, and I always define equity as being in a space where the organization provides everything that's possible for you to do your job and your work to the best of your ability. That's what I understand as equity. Now, in a lot of the work that I do, a lot of people just wanted me to come in and talk about diversity and inclusion, and I go, right, okay, that's good. That might be your entry point. I want to know, what does it look like when wherever you come from, you're treated and you're supported with the resources to get the job done equally. And then let's work our way back. So once I do that, and once I get a sense of that understanding, it matters not to me whether I know about your sexual orientation or not. If it means that you come to work and you are quite explicit about the way that you present around your orientation, that's your sense of ownership. That's fine. But even if I don't know, I should be conscious enough of my language and my behavior and the way that I treat you in that organization, because the organization is geared towards making sure that I treat you equitably, okay, and to make sure that I do that fairly. So again, for example, if I walked into an organization now, I know that because I don't have the relationship with individuals there that I do have with my friend who's a trans woman, I'm not going to go and use the term alphabet mafia, because I have no idea how that's going to land. I have no idea how it's going to go and sit. And even though I may use that in a general term, I'm not going to use it because what I don't want to do, to your earlier point, is I don't want to go in there and create offense and resistance straight away. I have to have a sense of understanding of what does it mean for you to belong here? What are the things that you actually need? However, what I will do is when I am speaking, I will make inference and reference to the fact that this is what it looks to show up for somebody who doesn't want you to know that they're gay or lesbian, but still wants to be treated okay. Who, when you ask them a question, are you married, or do you have a wife, or do you have a husband, and they say no, that you don't go down that road of really inquiring as to, well, why don't you have one? Is it because you're gay or you're lesbian or what have you? And you kind of like go into this rabbit hole that you don't need to, and end up offending people. And so for me, the main thing here is around the structure that you have. You have that sense of structure, and then you work your way backwards. What does it look to show up? So I'll give you a quick example. On LinkedIn today, I wrote about the history of Pride, and I highlighted to individuals that, Marsha P. Johnson, who was a prominent gay man and a trans activist as well, was responsible for corralling a lot of gay and lesbian individuals who, back in 1969, the year I was born, in New York, they're corralling a lot of individuals to fight back against a lot of the violence that they received at being gay and lesbian. And as a result, then we've got Stonewall, and then we've got Pride, and we've got these parades and organizations all doing their logos. And I just said, look, if you have that rainbow on your company digital assets, be your logo or your website or what have you, it's important that you understand what that actually stands for. What that means when you put it on there is that you stand together with the fact that a lot of trans people get killed each year across the world because they are trans. There are 69 countries around the world that it's criminal to be non-heterosexual, in some cases punishable by death. What if you, as an organization, what are you saying to somebody who may identify that way, if you're doing business with companies or individuals that have that, and that's quite strong and that's core as part of the business that you're doing? What does it mean when somebody in the organization says to you that that person's not normal just because they're not heterosexual? And so the point I was making was, rather than slapping you upside the head and telling you that you're some kind of homophobic organization, was rather, if you're going to go and make a stand, and if you are talking about being equal and having a sense of equity, understand what it really means to go the whole journey. And that if you are not consistent, or if you are not honest about that, the impact that it can have in terms of performance, in terms of productivity, in terms of employee engagement, it might not be as outspoken as you see it, but people will be like, well, hold on a minute. If this is what you say you're standing for, what about this, this, and this? And then we work our way towards understanding what can be done to improve it. Does that make sense? I know it's a bit of a ramble, but does that make sense?
No. I think you're. It totally makes sense. What I'm trying to figure out is, based on that, how do you sort of ask some of these other questions that pop up, because it's such a fascinating conversation to me. Yeah. The one thing really early on in the answer that you gave that really stood out for me was this idea that the idea of equity is to do your job the best of your ability. Yes. What I found fascinating about that statement is, to you, or at least the way you defined it as about doing your job, which on one hand totally makes sense. If you're a company, that's the only part you should even be worried about. Yeah. On the other hand, with something like COVID going on, where your job and your life start mixing up so much, yes, does the company have a greater responsibility? And what I'm referring to is, for example, in the U.S., there was a whole issue around trans individuals and what bathroom should they use.
Yes.
And I believe it was in the state of Georgia, if I remember correctly. And the
Mhm.
result of that was Georgia passed a bill around that issue, and a bunch of different companies withdrew
Yeah,
from going to Georgia and expanding into Georgia. I guess my question that goes along with it is, if you have a scenario like that, does a company should a company focus on the wellness of its people and their ability to do their jobs and go, well, we just simply want to expand there, but we don't. It doesn't have to change where we go for a conference or anything like that.
Mhm.
Or do they have a responsibility to actually advocate against the measures taken by the state of Georgia because it seeps into your employees' everyday life? Does that question make sense?
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. So I think it's a fine balancing act. I think there are some people who will be equipped to, in the same way that they will lobby the government around issues of taxation, in the
Yeah.
same way that they will lobby a government in the way that they will want them to release or relax stuff around immigration visas so that they can get staff in. I think that same energy can be used around equity. But then I also understand that there are some people who are quite afraid of going into those areas because they feel that if they even remotely are seen as representing it as an organization, it can actually be quite challenging. On the flip side, you can get individuals who are willing to be able to make a statement on that, and they will go there from an individual point of view, but with the blessing from the organization, rather than it saying this is the organization as a whole. This is as me as a senior leader, I am willing to put my my name and my space on my reputation on the line to say this is what I believe in and this is where I'm going. And I do understand to a greater extent why there will be organizations who wouldn't want to be in a state where that unfairness, the things around. I think, I mean, to be fair, I think there are so many conversations in this tend to be so binary, and there is a sense of nuance. It doesn't, in the same way that we can do uh, um, uh, a male, female, and then generally a disabled a toilet for those who are less able. I think there are ways of being flexible. There are a number of investment banks who I know who just before the pandemic, when I was working with them, they had literally had unisex toilets, and so individuals were able to go into those toilets, and it was your container. This is what it was, and the way you did your bathroom or washed your hands or what have you was outside of the actual bathroom. And they were able to handle that quite well. And I guess for me, it's a meeting of minds, because I'm not going to rock up to an organization that has really staunchly religious ideals about this kind of stuff and rock in there and go, all right, put your Bible or your Vedas or your Quran down or what have you. We're going to go into this because this is how you're going to. I'm not going to do that. I think it's important to be respectful of individuals who have that. I don't necessarily agree with their views, but I also think it's very important for me not to try and come and impose that. That's not, for me, that's not about thinking. That's dictatorship. So I would say when I'm sitting in consultation with individuals like that, I'll go, okay, what does your company actually stand for? What are the values? If your values are around integrity, if your values are around care and all this kind of stuff, what does that actually look like in practice? And when we start to explore that, when we look in the wider sense of what does that impact look like when you are faced with a situation where it does impact some member of your staff, whether it be around their sexual orientation, their race, their gender, their class, any one of those protected characteristics, and even the ones that we don't see, where somebody could be, a bit more neurodiverse and they process stuff differently, and they may be autistic or they may be dyspraxic or what have you. These ones are all challenges that organizations have. But what does your overall system that you have and the way that you've designed it, how does that support individuals? And are you willing to interrogate it? And to be fair with you as well, Darshan, some people don't. Some people don't care. Some people look me in my face and say, I don't care about that. I just want to make money. And I go, okay, cool. Not my client. I'll make a move. I'm not here to save the world. I'm here to do the bit that I can with the ones who want to go on the journey with me. But I'm not out here trying to save the world. That's not what I'm designed for. And I don't have the energy for that either, or the temperament. I'll end up knocking somebody out. So I just don't. I'll be honest with you. I don't have it for that. So let me work with what I can work with.
So that's kind of interesting. Because I'm thinking of an example. What if you walked into? Have you heard of Chick-fil-A by any chance?
Yes. Yeah. I know of Chick-fil-A. Yeah.
Okay. Do you know what? Like, do you know? I don't know if they're a UK brand at all. Are they?
No, they're a US brand, but I know the founder was very kind of like fundamental in in their religious beliefs, and
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm definitely not taking away from one's beliefs or anything like that. I guess they stand for I guess to phrase it as strong Christian values, and that's
Yes.
what they stand for. And I'm not taking away from that in any way.
Yeah.
My as part of that, and one of the things that I do hate them for, because the chicken's really good.
Yeah.
But on Sunday you can go to get the sandwich. I'm not quite sure why I'm doing a whole plug for Chick-fil-A, but ignore that for a second. But the part that goes on with it is that I would take, based on what they've put forward, I would assume that they are saying, we believe that everyone deserves respect.
Yes.
However, your position and your sexuality is against the values of the Bible, and therefore, I would imagine that if you came to them with say a program for equity and inclusion, like the one you're developing,
Yes.
their position would be, no, we believe in equality. We want to give everyone the same chance.
Yes.
But equity implies going above and beyond for one group over the other.
Yeah.
How do you respond to what is definitely a specific kind of logic? And is your position at that point that makes sense? It may not be with the logic I use, but it still makes sense. And do you engage with them, because they are still speaking for equality, but not for equity?
Yeah. So
I'm sorry. Before you continue, I do want to answer. I have no idea if that's their position. Just to be clear.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah. So I'll give you the background as to what I know, because one of the things in dealing with global companies is you see it around the world, how it shows up, and I know one of the big controversies that they had was specifically around same-sex marriage, where one of the senior leaders was outspoken. They didn't put it down as a company's position, but one of the senior leaders was very vocal about them disagreeing with that. And then I think the extension of that was that they were donating to a specific faith-based group that was very much against gay marriage, and it was very much against individuals who were homosexual. Yeah. So when I see some stuff like that, again, to your point, there are people who are going to be really shocked, because they're going to be like, man, that chicken is so good, right? these people are so good, but this is just messed up. Really, your leaders are really messed up. And one of the things I say is that, within organizations, people are always going to have different beliefs. And I can respect you without having to respect your belief. It's very important to be able to, and that's a key thing to know the difference. I can respect you without having to respect your belief. If you believe that, for the sake of argument, that that I am a sinner because a naked woman and a naked man ate an apple because a talking snake told them, "Here, have a bite of this." I'm not going to disrespect that as your belief. I'll still respect you. I just don't understand that. Likewise, is if you are an individual who opposes gay marriage because you think that, according to whatever holy text you have, that this marriage is only made for man and woman, that's your take. I'm happy to sit down there and tell you that marriage existed long before any one of these religious institutions picks it up. I can also be happy to tell you that marriage exists outside of religion in many other non-religious formats, be it pagan, be it civil ceremonies. And even though you can do the bans and all have the marks in churches, where the government actually literally sees your marriage as applicable is in a civil context and not a religious one. So when I see that, there are so many nuances to it. But if I was brought into that organization, for example, to talk about equity and inclusion, part of my question would be around how does that show up for you? If there is an individual who's in your ranks and they are a married couple of the same sex, would they be treated differently? Is there something or policy or conduct in the way that this will actually happen? Will the leader act with them differently? Will they have a sense of belonging? And if their answer was negative, I'd walk away, because that's not for me. That's not the organization that I would want to work with. I want to work with individuals who treat people as humans, regardless of where they come from. And if for my example, I felt that this was hampering or making somebody have to second guess about coming into work and how they show up, then that's not for me. That's not a battle I want to fight.
I have so many more questions that I really want to get into, but we're
I'll
well
come back for another episode. Don't you worry. I'm here. I'll come back with my malt. It's all good.
I believe the malt is now a requirement going forward.
Yes, standard. That's standard. Yeah. But to the point, Darshan, I think there is my if I'm really honest, my role is not to convince people of how they should behave. That's not my role. I don't see my role as that in any way. The only person I've got to convince about behavior change is myself. However, what I can do is I can say to you, this is what actually happens when you do treat somebody like a human. If you do want to have a state, an organization where you say that I want people to belong, and I want people to have a sense of equity and equality, and I want them to feel that they're doing their best self at work and not have to second guess when they walk through the door, then my thing is to start to unpick what does that actually really look like, build it back up again, and then bring in the voices of the individuals who it gets affected by. If people don't care about that, then there is nothing realistically that in my outside of the law changing that will force them to do that or what have you. There is nothing I can do to change that. So I only really want to work with individuals who want to go on that journey, who are really willing. That's my take on it.
I'll leave this point for our next conversation. So I'm definitely putting you at a disadvantage, but feel free to make an advantage.
We'll do a part two.
Some might argue that if you are in a position where you're not impacted by the situation, you have a opportunity, maybe not a responsibility, but an opportunity to advocate for a change.
Yeah.
The question is, do you, and I don't mean you specifically, I mean you as a third person, does one have a responsibility when they have the opportunity to advocate for change? I'm really referring to, let's say a Chris Pratt comes out and he hasn't, but there's an argument out there that I hear that he's a very religious man, and he follows his certain tenets, and there are people who are, for lack of a better term, social justice warriors who hold that against him, and the argument is that they think that he should allow for people to he should use his bully pulpit to advocate for people who may not have the same opportunities. So the question then becomes, do we have a responsibility, not just an opportunity to advocate? But that might be the conversation for another day, because this is easily another half hour to talk about. Do you want to do a quick response? Because I kind of feel bad not giving you the opportunity.
No, that's fine. So again, I think when you are there is a phrase, when you're in a position of responsibility and power, a lot of stuff actually comes alongside with that as well, and you've got to be aware of it. So again, for me, I will advocate on my platform. So I will speak to power around issues around equality and equity and what that actually looks like. Last year, I was extremely busy because of the whole what I call the racial awakening after George Floyd. There were lots of individuals who didn't realize that people with color were offended and got, and were hard done by up until that point. And I made it very clear to individuals from the beginning, I'm not coming in here to make you feel shame, to make you feel blame, or to feel guilt. But I do want you to realize that some of the conversations that I will bring to you will be uncomfortable. And I want you to be aware of that discomfort, because part of that discomfort is what will make you to start think slightly differently. So, for example, the whole concept of whiteness and blackness, it's a construct. Okay, there are only two racial groups in the whole world defined by their skin color. All right, white and black, and everybody else in between can just go and enjoy themselves and go about their business. And it becomes so polarized. But then when you go back and have a look at the history, you realize why it was actually created. Why, many Europeans who were Nordic, who were, from the northern part of Europe, were defined as white. And if you were Southern, if you were Italian, if you were Greek, if you were Turkish, if you were Spanish, you weren't seen as white until it came to America. And then, all this kind of differentiation to be on this side rather than the other side. And then you realize all the other institutions that were built up around media, around education, around housing, and around the way that people even referenced, just even being able to use medicine, being able to have, skincare, or dealing with diabetes, or all these kinds of medical things. There was all this isolation and systemic racism was built into the way that these things were done. And then obviously on the other side of that, you then had individuals from origin who were Southern Asian or East Asian were, once upon a time, they were pariahs, but then around the 60s, they were then put forward as the model minority. And the model minority were then, these are the people who work hard, they never complain about racism, they come in here and they just do what they tell them, they're fine and they're successful, follow them. And there was all this schism, and I was like, well, look, this is quite, if you really have a look at it, there's a quite strong intention as to how people can be kept into their buckets or their pockets around these specific labels. But what we can do as individuals is go, hold on a minute, I want to really want to question that. What does it actually mean, me being the model minority? What does it mean when we talk about the mattering of one life over the other, or somebody says Black lives and everybody says all lives? What does that actually mean, and what's actually happening behind that? And rather than going to people, I'm going to slap you upside the head and say, right, you need to go out there and hold up a poster, because if you don't, you're a racist and you're done. My thing was more about, how can we really explore this and have a decent conversation and understand both the painful side of that history, but knowing where we're at now, what can we do to move it forward that we all win? And that for me is the key thing. So I've got my pulpit where I can use my podcast. I can be very outspoken. Somebody told me today that they found that sometimes they go and see my stuff on social media and it jars them and it can be quite provoking. And I said, that's intentional. I want you to feel slightly uncomfortable. I want to interrupt your pattern. So you go, oh my God, I never thought about it that way. But not to make you feel bad, but to make you to start to understand somebody else's lived experience. And that for me is a big thing. How can we understand that? Yes, I can use my platform to speak against it, but I'm not going to walk into an organization where I'm really not welcome.
That's fascinating. And you drew a really interesting line where sometimes your opportunity and your responsibility doesn't have to be at that moment. It can be at a different moment. Yes. And I think that's a really important takeaway. Quick question for you. What is one question based on our discussion you'd like to ask the audience?
So there was one running through my mind, but I think I've changed it now. Yes, because I think, and I haven't even been drinking alcohol. Can you imagine? So the question that I would really love to ask them is, for me, is what does good leadership look like for you?
Okay. Do you want to give a couple of options? Because LinkedIn surveys are the new in thing.
Oh, wow. I avoid them, by the way. I know they're there, but I just avoid them like the plague. I open up my thing and I see about 700 questions. I don't want to answer you any of your questions. Give me a video. Yeah, what does good leadership look like for you? So at question one, is it a charismatic person who can take you on a journey? Question two, is it being able to trust in somebody regardless of whether or not you like them or not? And number three, is good leadership when you feel empowered to be able to do exactly the same as the person who's leading you?
Oh, those are good. Those are really good.
Come on
now. Okay. As you know, I also asked 2 rapid fire questions. So my first question for you, this month, what is something you learned? And I recognize it's only 10 days into the month, but still.
Yeah, that's fine. So I'm reading a book at the moment by an author called Nicholas Taleb, and he wrote Black Swan and a couple of others. So he's got a series of books called Incerto, and the book I'm reading at the moment is called Anti-Fragile. And what I really love about that, it's a dense book. I do this so dense, man, but dense in a good word, by the way, in terms of writing, not in a weird way. But what I've really loved about that is the concept that very often we may just focus on being resilient, how we bounce back from a situation. But the concept of anti-fragile, it really appeals to us as human beings, is how not only do we bounce back from a situation, but how do we get even stronger? And I love that. I absolutely love that concept. That's one thing. That's one thing I've learned within the last 10 days.
That's pretty good. I have a question, and I haven't seen this one. I'm a huge movie buff.
Yes.
And in the M. Night Shyamalan movies, there was one called Unbreakable, I believe.
Yes. Yeah.
I didn't watch it, so I have no idea, but it sounds very similar to the concept you're describing. Mm-hmm. Is it or not quite?
It's not quite. It's not quite. Okay. It could be, but it's not quite. Yeah.
I went purely off the name. Works 60% of the time every time. You know what that's from?
No, where's that from?
Anchorman. That's Black.
I've never watched that. My daughter's a mad film and she loves that film. I've never watched it. I fell asleep in it twice.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It is the most ridiculous movie in the world.
That's probably why I fall asleep.
One more question.
Yes.
What is something? Hold on. Let me phrase this properly. What was the most memorable thing that happened to you this week?
This week. Oh, we are on Thursday, so I'm going to think. Oh, the most memorable thing that happened to me this week is my youngest daughter's away at college. We have slightly longer terms than you in the US. So she just finished her last exam this week, but she came down on Monday and she had to go to the dentist on Tuesday. But just seeing her come home after being away for so long, just to spend that night and just to get a really nice hug from her before she goes back up to the end of the month, that was memorable. That definitely just stays in my heart. That's nice. It's those little things, those really small little things. Because she's not my baby anymore, right? She's not well, she is, but she's not my babe. She's a big woman now. But that was incredibly memorable, and I love that. That really stuck in my mind for this week.
I love that. I do have a question, which is, I thought the UK was in shutdown or effectively in shutdown, so she still was at the whole time during that.
Have the British ever cared? Have the British ever cared? So a large proportion of the population are vaccinated, including myself. And a lot of the younger ones aren't, but they're okay and they're traveling. So we have limited ways that we can group. So we're not like in level 4 lockdown where we were before, where we had to stay in our houses. We're a lot more open now. So we're trading. We're still going to restaurants, which are a bit more tends to be a bit more open. And now we're starting to go inside as well. So yeah, things have changed. It's not too bad.
Good to know.
We're crazy. We're crazy nation. Always have been.
Aren't we all? So let me do a quick summary of what we spoke about. We spoke a little bit about where you came from, your origin as a racketeur, because I will insist on using that term as much as I can now for the next few days. Also, your background as a comedian, but we spoke about the role of taking offense in the role of comedy and in the role of corporate speak, and you spoke about your background as a speechwriter. Doing presentations and leadership communication, and how that's actually impacted how you advise people. One of the key things you spoke about that really spoke to me was have an intent in mind, and that intent in mind is what you look at when deciding if something's appropriate or inappropriate to say, which I think is really interesting in a time like today, where it's often a question of how do people receive it. But you're saying focus on what you can control, which is your own intent. You spoke about the role of vulnerability, which is an unusual role to speak about in the context of leadership. And you talked about self-deprecation. You came back over and over again to the concept of trust, which I think is incredibly important. And then you spoke about values and rituals, and we delved a little bit into values and rituals and what that could look like. Should there be a more formal policy around that, or not quite? And I love the idea that as someone who spent far too long in corporate America, I think about writing down a policy around values, but ignoring that part of it. I think that's interesting. But also just in leadership, how the wrong terms can result in not just a loss of trust, but also a loss of authority. We then actually spoke a little bit about the program you're developing on equity and inclusion, and we talked about the role of equity in doing your job to the best of your ability, which I think is really kind of important. And then we sort of parsed that a little bit more. We spoke about how people are using this opportunity to sort of make their rainbows, their logos into rainbows, and you talked about discussing the history behind that and the implications and the importance of that. And then we delved a little bit into equality versus equity and the distinction between the two and the impact thereof. And all of it came out, as I see it, from your role as a pattern interrupter. Did I miss anything?
No, that was it. That was good.
Awesome. Now, David, I have a question for you. If people have questions for you, where can they reach you?
So they can either reach me directly, davidmcqueen.co.uk. I used to boast that you could just type David McQueen in the Google and I'll come up in the top 3 results. But then I saw in one of my results there was somebody who had committed a crime, I think murder. I tell them to go straight to my address now. So I can either do that at davidmcqueen.co.uk or on LinkedIn, which is my most active social media platform. I'm there as Mr. David McQueen.
Mr. David McQueen. I love it.
Yes.
And you can find me at Darshan Talks on Twitter, or just go to our website, darshantalks.com. Again, David, this was amazing having you on. Thank you so much for your help and for coming on.
Thank you, and I look forward to part 2.
Me too.